is there any way to word some sort of language about a commitment towards really targeting STEM? And a lot of this, like everyone needs all of this, but
regarding targeting
sciences as far as like education about like these kind of issues, because like I know like one Black woman on this campus is often like one or the only like Black woman person in their classroom, and basically just has to sit there in the corner and suffer through everything. And like I complain about my classes.
Jamil starts by saying, is there any way to word some sort of language about the commitment towards really targeting STEM in a lot of this? When we first heard that, we were shocked. And then soon thereafter, when the protesters became rioters and started doing both physical damage on campus and actual assault and battery to students who disagreed with them, the places on campus that were targeted were the library and the science labs. The windows of the science labs were broken. The Museum of Natural History was vandalized, and the library was vandalized, which is exactly in keeping with the idea that in order to get rid of white supremacy, we need to shut down science, technology, engineering, and math. So let me just say a few words about the thing that is happening right now before we go into more analysis. This is Gizmodo's summary of the goals of shut down STEM. Quote, white supremacy is baked into science and academia, from racist language in textbooks to a culture that excludes Black scientists from innovating and advancing at the same pace as their colleagues. But rather than more milquetoast statements and diversity initiatives, researchers want action. Organizers are asking the scientific community to participate in a work stoppage on Wednesday, June 10th, to bring attention to racism in the world of research. Just asterisk. The idea that the culture of academia and science is excluding Black scientists from innovating and advancing is a claim for which I have seen exactly zero evidence, but it is a claim that is being tied to the claim that police brutality can target Black men in particular disproportionately, for which we do have some evidence, right? Those claims, because they both seem to be about racism, are linked, and you're not allowed to disagree with one for fear that you are understood to be disagreeing with the other. This is from the actual Shutdown STEM website. Those of us who are not Black, particularly those of us who are white, play a key role in perpetuating systemic racism. Direct actions are needed to stop this injustice. Unless you engage directly with eliminating racism, you are perpetuating it. This moment calls for profound change. Hashtag shutdown academia and hashtag shutdown STEM is the time for white and non-Black people of color. This is a new acronym to me, NBPOC, non-Black people of color, to not only educate themselves, but to define a detailed plan of action to carry forward. And Wednesday, June 10th will mark that day. Okay, so we can take that down. That's one more thing. We are beginning to see the movement splinter into its constituent parts. These are all screenshots of tweets from the last day or two. This is Nature magazine, one of the two biggest, most important, preeminent science journals in the world, saying that they are going to be joining Shutdown STEM. Striking for Black lives is one of the taglines that people have become convinced this is what it's about. Next, from Science, the editor-in-chief of Science says science and scientists must say out loud that they have benefited from and failed to acknowledge white supremacy. Next, one of many societies, professional societies, this happens to be the Society for Research and Child Development, is saying shut down academia and genuflecting before the new gods. 4, we have some academics with their version of, well, what they actually say is looking forward to shut down STEM and having conversations with my students tomorrow about racism in academia. As folks who hold any power in academia, it is our responsibility to disrupt the system and take responsibility for our ongoing contributions to systemic oppression. I read this as, don't hurt me. Please move along. Nothing to see here. 5, this craziness from an academic. Hat tip to Lee Jessam for pointing this out to me. I hope there are a lot of circles in academia having serious conversation on how academic freedom upholds white supremacy, racism, and prejudice. Yep. And finally, 6, we have a PhD student, Zachary 6, saying, oh boy, I can't read that. I'm not sure what it says. Among other things, she says, the science can wait. Because obviously, in the middle of a global pandemic, the science can wait.
Well, they have taken pains.
Exactly.
They have learned from the accusation that there's something untoward about mass protests when we should be social distancing. And so they have taken pains to exclude work on COVID-19 from their shutdown.
They didn't even at first, though. They've added that in.
They've
added
paragraphs.
That.
Maybe they got some immediate pushback.
Yeah.
There's a bunch to say here, but I really think the most important thing we can do, and we have to make sure to do a good job of it before we're done here today, is to give people a sense for what they are actually seeing. Because almost all of this is euphemistic and not straightforward. It's Potemkin. It's not to be taken at face value. Yeah. And frankly, there are two experiences for us that are happening simultaneously. Mm-hmm. On the one hand, we are having a large number of people wake up to the fact that what they saw happen to us at Evergreen is part of something much larger, as we tried to warn them. And so on the one hand, that's reassuring that at least we are not in a tiny group of people who see it. Many more people are seeing it this week than last, for example. Yeah. But there is also this increasingly frustrating sense that we lived through this in order to make it possible to avoid having this take over civilization. In other words, I feel like we paid a high price, at least in terms of our security in the world. We were tossed into a completely unknown realm, and we are still there. We're doing fine, but we had tenured jobs. Now we're here on the internet trying to figure out what our new job is.
Right.
So in some sense, this was all for naught. We went through this. We had the police withdrawn from a riot against us, and we watched the community patrols descend immediately into violence. We know what happens when you shut down the police. And I must say, as much as it was surprising to see Jamil talking so openly and on camera about his feeling that STEM was the problem, I can't remember the first instance, but somewhere in the year prior to Evergreen's meltdown, I remember, it may have been in a faculty meeting, I remember saying something about that what was unfolding was a challenge to Enlightenment values and that we academics had an obligation to defend them. And I remember being stunned to hear an attack on Enlightenment values come back, right? Yeah. Not just the Enlightenment, right? But Enlightenment values. Mm-hmm. And at first it was...
Which I understand to be rigor and logic in combination with compassion for the humanity of all people.
Right.
And, maybe that's a sort of stricto lato. That's it's a really broad interpretation, and a more narrow interpretation is just maybe about logic and rigor and using science to understand what we do in the world. But even so, those are the values that you're fighting back against?
It was stunning to me. I didn't think anybody could marshal such a broken argument in public and not have, a faculty assembled for a faculty meeting erupt in people saying, wait, no, you don't have that right. You haven't understood what Enlightenment values are then, because you couldn't possibly be attacking them. But it was just silence, right? Yeah. And
people are scared.
That is the thing people need to understand, is that at some level, we've said in other contexts, that frequently you will understand what people are doing better if you turn down the sound, because we humans can't help but process language. Yeah. And if you listen to what people say they are doing, then you will often be misled if what they are doing is not the same thing. And so you have lots of people who are saying that they are looking forward to talking about bias in the sciences. Okay, there's nothing wrong with talking about bias in the sciences. It exists, and it has a long and dark history. Agreed. But
certainly up through the end of the 19th century, it was actually a primarily not just white and male endeavor, but also sort of a landed white and male endeavors. It was rich people, and those rich people tended to be men, and those rich people tended to be white. And what has happened in the 20th century, in part, is an opening up across all of those demographic categories. And, obviously I have benefited from it being open to women, but I think more so everyone effectively who's doing science today has benefited from it no longer being just appropriate for the landed gentry. right? This is now actually open to anyone. Now, there's a move away from that now. We've talked a little bit about the problems in modern science before, but the fact that in theory, you can get yourself into college and get through and become a scientist no matter where you came from is wholly different from anything that was true of the Western scientific tradition up until, I don't know, at least the turn of the 19th to 20th century.
Yeah, the door is wide open, which doesn't mean people are walking through it in numbers that are proportional to their numbers in the population. And
Sure.
It is certainly worth talking about why that isn't the case and what might be done about it. I think it would be wonderful if people did show up in numbers that were proportional. But nonetheless, if you're scratching your head, if this is the first time you've heard Enlightenment values challenged, please understand, shut down STEM is a new kind of tactic. I tried to get somebody to tell me if this tactic had a name, and a lot of people came up with things that were in the ballpark, but nobody has come up with a description. The thing about shut down STEM, and it works the same way for defund the police, is that these terms are basically a floating point variable. Shut down STEM could mean what people presumably at science think they're doing when they use their platform to broadcast this stuff, that we are shutting down for a day symbolically to acknowledge that there's been some bias, right? Yep. But imagine that you were sitting somewhere and you thought, how can we demonstrate our power? Let's get the very top echelon of science to broadcast #shutdownstem, right? And then you realize that those same people who seek this kind of power are also actually broadcasting the message that science itself is the problem. You heard their language, that white supremacy is baked into science. Think about how preposterous a claim this is, right? Scientific method. You observe a pattern, you hypothesize a possible explanation, you come up with some predictions that would be true if the hypothesis was correct, and then you run a test, right? But they're pretending that the scientific method is something like you observe a pattern, you come up with some explanation that blames black people, and then you broadcast it without checking, right?
Now, has science been done badly? A lot?
Sure.
Absolutely. Has some of that bad science been done badly in service of racist goals? Yes. Is that happening in the last 20 years? I don't see any evidence of it. And we've gone looking,
even if it is
50 years even, right? And that's not to say that this isn't pretty recent history, and that there hasn't been a lot of, frankly, evil done in the uniform of science, but that doesn't make it science. But just like #Black Lives Matter is cloaking itself in something that sounds honorable and amazing and is not actually that inside. The idea that eugenics or social Darwinism is actually a scientific study, it's not. It's the same misapprehension.
But even if it was, let's transport ourselves back 50 or 100 years, right? The cure for bad science is good science, and it always has been. Science is a bias correction mechanism. That's really the only thing it does. You don't need science to tell you things that are obvious. You need science to tell you things that are counterintuitive, which means that whatever your biases are, science is the tool for addressing them. And I would say further, let's imagine, so if you listen to the leaders of the movement and you listen to what their internal conversation sounds like, they say, look, white supremacy is so baked in that you have to level the institution and replace it with something else. And sometimes they will say something Afrocentric, right? Now let's suppose for a moment that there was some other system that was interested in what's true. That's what science is about, what's true. And it was self-correcting, which is the beauty of science, the thing that separates it from every other method. Let's suppose that you did have an alternative method. All the better if it comes from Africa. Lovely. Yeah. Okay. So you've got some other method that is both self-correcting and interested in the truth. What will happen to it if you set it in motion? It will converge on Enlightenment science. That's right. What it'll do.
Yeah.
So
at this point in a global economy, it will. And we know that there have been other Enlightenments. The Enlightenment that we talk about when we refer to it is the European Enlightenment. But the Maya, as we have talked about before. The Maya had an enlightenment many hundreds of years before the Europeans did. And although we know very little about what their inner workings of their thinking was, because almost their entire library was destroyed, in fact, by the Spaniards when they arrived, although the Maya themselves were already a culture in decline at the point that the Spaniards arrived. What we do know is that they had astronomers, they had scribes, they had a concept of zero, they had mathematics, they had vast written literature, they had an enlightenment.
Advanced agricultural chemistry.
Yeah.
So I don't even want to put caveats on it, though. You need two characteristics to guarantee that all you have to add is time before you rediscover science,
yes.
right? It doesn't matter what the nature of a truth-seeking, self-correcting mechanism is. It will inevitably land there. And what that means is that the right thing to do, if you really want to empower Black people, and believe me, I do, if you really want to do that, the best thing you can do is you can arm them with the tools of science rather than setting us back hundreds of years and waiting for some other method to converge on discoveries we've already got. You can arm them. You can democratize these tools, which is exactly what we were doing at Evergreen. It is exactly why they had to come for us. Now, this is the part that I think people are going to be totally bewildered by. Why, if this movement is so interested in empowering Black people, would it attack a tool that was really their best weapon in order to end whatever oppression remains? And here's the reason. This movement isn't what it looks like. This movement is a false version of something that doesn't exist to be found in large numbers. In other words, the energy has been captured by people who are not well-intentioned. And the reason that they hate science is because science is a good mechanism for figuring out what's true, and what they are peddling is not true. So the last thing they want is people empowered to check their claims because their claims don't stand up. And we saw this all over the Evergreen debacle, right?
Yes,
when we said, okay, you're telling us that there is racism at Evergreen, where's the evidence? And what did they say? They said to ask for evidence of racism is racism with a capital R. Now, that's obviously a preposterous circular bit of logic, but the idea...
And even more precisely, to ask for evidence of racism is evidence of racism.
Yep. So it's inescapable. It's hermetically sealed by design. So now think about what you've seen. You've seen tens of thousands of people in the street marching behind banners that seem superficially like they might be pointed in the direction of something good, but are actually Trojan horses hiding something else.
And most of them don't know they're carrying Trojan horses, I don't think.
They have no idea.
Yeah.
And even the ones, so you point to some of the tweets that people are, you said that they are basically saying, don't hurt me. That's certainly a component of it, but there's something far more insidious here. When these people, they see the mob coming, they look at their skin, they say, uh-oh, I don't want to be backed against the wall. And they figure out what you have to say in order not to get backed against the wall, to get the mob to move on to somebody else. A, they are externalizing harm onto the next person, right? They have an obligation to stand up, and by not standing up, they make the mob stronger, and then the next person that backs against the wall has an even bigger problem, right? So this is not cool. But the worst part of it, and we've seen it hundreds of times, is the individual says this thing to get the mob to leave them alone, and then they've got a problem. How the hell are you going to sleep after you've done that, right? So what do? They tell themselves that it's true, right? They forget what they knew, and they tell themselves this is actually the right thing. That's why I did it. And so now the point is, the mob didn't just move on. It actually captured their minds, right? Now, the reason that people like us were so animated after the Evergreen meltdown was that we saw this force take over lots and lots of people who should know better. And after it took them over, there was no place that you could say it stops here, which is why I said in that clip what I said. It's why I said the same thing to Congress, right? This is going to eventually spill over into anything. Now, truth be told, I'm impressed at the speed. But nonetheless, the mechanism was obvious. And, well, anyway, it is very important that you think, what is the most parsimonious explanation for what I'm seeing? Is this an honest confusion about whether science is a good thing, or is this a demonstration of power?